Welcome to the Green Party's 2020 Legislative Agenda Press Conference. I'm State Party Co-Chair Peter Lavinia. Unfortunately, as I look around the room, I realize this might be our last legislative agenda rollout as a qualified ballot status party. We're here to present our agenda, an agenda to make New York a better, more equitable, and more grassroots democratic state, one in keeping with our eco-socialist principles. And we present these ideas with a sincere hope that they will be imitated and passed this session. The Green New Deal, one of whose authors is here in the room today, has become a rallying cry. And as much as we wish we received some credit, we are glad to have moved the conversation on a life or death issue like the climate crisis. Surveying what the 2020 State of the State will likely contain, our ideas are bold where the governors are once again limited and timid. Where Governor Cuomo proposes banning single-use styrofoam containers, which are a good thing, we propose a rapid transition to a 100% renewable energy economy. Where Cuomo talks about combating the opioid crisis by banning fentanyl analogs, we say legalize marijuana to criminalize other drugs and treat addiction as a health problem and not a crime. Where the governor calls for mandatory recounts in close elections, we call for deep electoral reforms like ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Where the budget has a $6 billion deficit, we say stop rebating the stock transfer tax, as we've been talking about for the last 15 years, and raise taxes on the wealthy and corporations. Let's use the budget deficit as an example. For years, we have said New York should stop rebating the stock transfer tax, a minor fee on stock transactions that has existed for over a century, but rebated since the governor's father's administration. On average, it is $12 billion a year, enough to cover the gap on its own. Perhaps the friendliness between the Democratic Party and Wall Street prevents this. We've also called for raising taxes on the wealthy and corporations and cutting them on working class New Yorkers, which could be done by reverting to the progressive 15-bracket system that New York had in the 1970s. These are bold ideas that might put the state on a firmer financial footing for the long term. But unfortunately, we suspect there will instead be wrangling about minor tax increases and services cuts. Our agenda to be outlined by the speakers today is similarly bold. Single-payer universal health care. It's cheaper and would solve the Medicaid problems facing the state, besides covering everyone. Renewable energy and public power. We have 10 years to stop catastrophic climate change. Marijuana legalization and criminal justice reform. It's time to end the failed war on drugs and give restitution to communities devastated by the drug war. And finally, real electoral reform. We need real changes to broaden and deepen democracy in New York. So right now I'd like to turn to CJ Chapman, who's going to discuss single-payer health care and why we absolutely need to pass the New York Health Act this session.
Universal health care is something the majority of Americans support, all of us deserve, and we in New York State can make a reality. Healthcare is a human right, which is why the Green Party calls on the New York State Legislature to pass the New York Health Act. I'm a mother to a toddler and live with chronic health conditions. Both my son and I receive Medicaid, and while I'm grateful for that every day, I dread opening each piece of mail we get from DSS because it might be the letter that says we lose our coverage. Meanwhile, my partner has insurance through his employer, but his copays and deductibles are so high that he's essentially paying for a plan that he can't afford to use. Our situation is not unique. Millions across the state are underinsured and unable to get the healthcare they need due to financial barriers imposed by insurance and pharmaceutical companies. The New York Health Act solves these problems for families like mine by making healthcare accessible, affordable, and guaranteed, not just for us, but for all New Yorkers. Thanks to wide support and dedicated organizing, the New York Health Act has passed in the Assembly for the past 5 years and was co-sponsored by almost half of our state senators. Last year, I stood at this press conference hopeful that the new Democratic Senate majority would put people before politics and pass the New York Health Act. Their inaction proves we cannot count on politicians to do something just because it is right or keep their promises without pressure. That's why the Green Party of New York State is committed to continuing the grassroots organizing necessary to hold our senators and governor accountable and to get New York Health passed and signed into law. Our opponents claim that New York cannot afford to pass universal health care. But in reality, we can't afford not to. Our state faces a $6 billion budget gap, and the scramble to close it has put Medicaid in the crosshairs. This and the governor's proposed Prescription Importation Commission are shallow, short-sighted solutions. Medicaid cuts will hurt the 6.5 million disabled, low-income New Yorkers who rely on the program, and importing drugs from Canada is nothing more than a Band-Aid. The real solution is the New York Health Act. We have several studies that show that universal health care in New York and nationally is viable, and that a single-payer system would actually lower healthcare costs by $45 billion in the first year alone. We need fundamental change in how we do healthcare in this state and in this country. New Yorkers and Americans demand it. Presidential candidates have taken notice, and it's time Governor Cuomo and the Senate Democrats do as well. No half measures, no quick fixes, and no low-hanging fruit. We don't want another commission. We want the New York Health Act passed and signed into law. Passing universal, single-payer healthcare will be liberating for all working people in New York. The only losers will be those profiting from the current unsustainable and inhumane status quo. As Greens, we are part of a movement of New Yorkers demanding change, and we call on the legislature to make passing universal, single-payer healthcare a top priority this session for families like mine and for all of us.
Thank you, CJ. I'd like to bring Mark Dunley up to the podium, who will talk about the steps we need to take in order to prevent the catastrophic climate crisis that is looming.
Thank you, Peter. I'm Mark Dunley. I was a recent Green Party candidate for state controller. As Peter said, the IPCC estimates we have 11 years left for dramatic worldwide action to prevent the worst of catastrophic climate change. Others, in fact, say that we may already have passed the tipping point. Last year, the state legislature, or earlier this year, passed the CLCPA, which, while might be the strongest climate change law in the country, is grossly inadequate to actually solve the crisis. And unfortunately, that is not even the law yet in New York State, because the legislature set it up that the governor first had to sign another bill on environmental justice measures, and he has failed to do so. The Greens believe we need to act like there's a climate emergency. There is legislation that has been introduced to do that. It would also immediately call for a halt to all new fossil fuel plants. We need to mobilize all resources to stop the use of fossil fuels and to increase the use of energy efficiency and to expand rapidly the deployment of renewable energy. The reality is, over the last 17 years, under 4 different governors, 3 Democrats, 1 Republicans, New York has managed to add less than 5% of the state electricity coming from wind and solar, and electricity actually represents less than 25% of the state's carbon footprint. Just recently was the 5th anniversary of the ban that was instituted in New York State on hydrofracking. I remember when Howie Hawkins, in his 2010 gubernatorial campaign, called for such a ban, as well as calling for a Green New Deal. He was in fact opposed by many of the environmental groups that took credit yesterday for this renewable, for this ban on hydrofracking. The Greens usually find ourselves 5-10 years out in front of other groups when it comes to needed changes, whether that's single-payer healthcare, marijuana legalization, same-sex marriage, or climate change. We are glad to see a lot of groups are now beginning to support our climate agenda. There's a campaign for a Green New Deal in New York State. They're asking for a $10 billion annual investment in renewable energy and a just transition, which also includes a tax on the rich. We hope that the governor and the legislature will include this in this year's budget, as well as the $1 billion that the New York Renews Coalition has been calling for various environmental justice measures. The most critical thing is we have to immediately halt all new fossil fuel projects and rapidly phase out existing ones. That means stopping the Williams pipeline. It means stopping Dan Scammer and Cricket Valley fossil fuel plants, both of which are in the process of being built and approved. It means shutting down the CPV power plant, which the governor's campaign manager was convicted of bribery over. We're also very happy to see, the Greens have always called for an eco-socialist Green New Deal, combining rapid action to cut emissions and move to 100% clean energy by 2030, but also with strong economic justice, economic Bill of Rights component, including single-payer health care, a guaranteed living wage jobs for all, and affordable housing. But the eco-socialist part also understands that not only do we need to get rid of capitalism, which has driven the climate change and the ceaseless search for profits and growth, but we particularly need to move to a system of public ownership and democratic control of the energy system. That includes democratizing and expanding the New York Power Authority. They should be building renewables. They should, for instance, be building offshore wind. We also support providing upfront state funding to local governments to do their own municipal ownership of wind and solar and energy efficiency measures, as well as supporting community and worker ownership. One of the good things that was very much weakened because of the governor's opposition in the recent climate deal was the idea, the concept that we have to invest climate funds in helping disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, communities of color. We want to ensure that 40% of all climate funding is in fact dedicated to this community, and that we provide guaranteed wages for existing workers in the fossil fuel industry who may lose their jobs during the transition. We support all new vehicles being carbon-free by 2025. We also support New York adopting the building codes standards of California, which equally requires all new buildings not only to be carbon-free, but also incorporate solar in that. We mentioned earlier we do support taxing the wealthy to help pay for this transition. However, we also support a very robust carbon tax, not the type of cap and trade programs that the New York State has adopted through RGGI and is now looking at with respect to transportation. We were encouraged that the governor recently basically supported our call on trying to move more strongly against single-use plastics. We were finally able to get the governor, after he vetoed basically the New York City ban on plastic bags, to do a ban on plastic bags in New York State. We still need to amend that law to also impose a fee of 5 cents on paper bags, so we don't just switch from plastic to paper, which has its own additional problems. The governor just recently called for a ban on styrofoam, certainly a very good deal. We should expand that to also limit plastic straws and plastic utensils. We should expand the bottle bill to other containers such as alcohol. And in fact, we need to really just eliminate so much of the packaging that is plastic-based. We do oppose the Champlain Hudson Power Express transmission line coming from Montreal to New York City to bring hydro from Hydro-Quebec. There are a lot of negative environmental problems with hydro that we can explain in more detail, but also investing billions of dollars in building a transmission line to import electricity 300 miles undercuts investments that really should be done for local renewable energy, starting with the offshore wind, but also energy conservation and community solar. Finally, one of the things that was required as part of the CLCPA was various climate advisory councils to be established, included in the areas of just transition and environmental justice. As the state's opposition party, we said the only opposition party, but particularly as the opposition party that is renowned not only in New York State and nationally and worldwide for our leadership on climate issues, the governor should be appointing Greens to all these various commissions. And if they did not appoint Greens, we need to appoint people who are willing to rock the boat. Invariably, these commissions are put in primarily dominated, of course, by the governor's own staff, but by influential individuals who frankly are more interested in ensuring that funding continues to flow to their particular constituency, rather than being willing to stand up and challenge the governor and saying not enough is being done to save life on this planet, and we need a much stronger and faster climate change agenda than the present one, 85% carbon emission reductions by 2050. We have said that the most important part of the CLCPA is the goal of 70% renewable energy for electricity by 2030. We doubt that the governor will achieve that goal. We need to invest money, but we also need to dramatically speed up the siting of renewable energy facilities, which right now is one of the biggest barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to have Caleb Winters come up. Caleb Winters is the chair of the Upper Hudson Green Party. He's going to speak on marijuana legalization and criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Peter. Cannabis legalization is long overdue in New York State. 63% of New Yorkers support it. Meanwhile, recreational consumers and card-carrying medical patients from New York State are traveling across the border to Massachusetts to legally purchase less expensive cannabis in a variety of forms they can't obtain in New York. The New York State Comptroller reported that legalization could bring an additional $1.3 billion in revenue to state and local governments. The Green Party believes the state should ensure that big business does not have a stranglehold on the cannabis industry. Residents should be allowed to grow cannabis at home with no restriction on the number of plants for personal use. There also should be no restriction on where it can be grown or where it can be seen on private property. Sales should be regulated either through state-owned and operated stores or through locally owned cooperative businesses, and communities should not be allowed to opt out of legalization or retail sales. Former nonviolent drug offenders and their family members should be given preference for licenses to cultivate and sell cannabis, or at the very least be given employment preference at these businesses at a living wage. No licenses should be given to big tobacco, liquor, pharmaceutical, or multinational companies, and medical cannabis dispensaries licensed under the Compassionate Care Act should be prohibited from also being licensed as recreational cannabis dispensaries, so that there is no unfair economic advantage. All cannabis should be required to be grown organically and non-GMO. It should be taxed at normal sales tax rates, and the state should not make a profit from taxes on cannabis. Cannabis use should not exclude people from living in public housing. Children should not be taken from their parent or guardian for testing positive for THC. Testing people for THC should be banned for both employment and public assistance eligibility. Also, New York State renters, which make up 54% of the population, need a space to consume cannabis without facing eviction, and cannabis should be allowed to be consumed in public where cigarette smoking is allowed. The Green Party also believes that cannabis cannot be legalized without wholesale criminal justice reform in New York State. This is not just an issue of revenue, but is intimately tied to criminal justice reform. Nearly 800,000 people have been arrested in the last 20 years in New York on marijuana charges. The majority being people of color. Whole communities have been devastated by the war on drugs and its racist policies of mass incarceration. We call for the immediate release of all individuals currently serving time for nonviolent drug offenses and the expungement of their records. We need to legalize all drugs and treat substance abuse as a community health issue, like, for example, Portugal has successfully done. Released nonviolent drug offenders should be ensured restitution including employment, housing, and health services, and the restoration of their civil rights and liberties. We must also restore voting rights to all persons convicted of a felony while incarcerated and on parole. We must establish a Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission to study the impacts of mass incarceration on New Yorkers, largely brought about by the failed war on drugs. We must provide access to education at all levels to incarcerated people in all of New York State's prisons. There are adjudicated juveniles who are court-placed or committed to youth facilities who are eligible for and would benefit from expanded college access. Any initiatives for incarcerated adults must also include juveniles, and we must establish a state government-funded prison-to-college pipeline program. We also must eliminate solitary confinement, a practice that is both dangerous and torturous. We believe the prison institutions and personnel should be barred from earning, expropriating, and extorting any money from prisoners' wages, and that prisoners should not be punished for refusing to participate in prison-based industries such as courtcraft. We should also prohibit state-chartered banking institutions from investing in and providing financing for private prisons. We must immediately terminate stop and frisk and broken windows quota-based police practices. Governor Cuomo's failed plan to add more police to the subways in New York City to criminalize small vendors and fare jumpers will again primarily target the working class, the poor, and people of color. And we need free, well-funded public transit, not more arrests for petty crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. I'd like to talk about electoral reform. Of course, part of the Green Agenda in 2020 is overturning the faux reforms proposed by the Public Campaign Finance Reform Commission in terms of ballot access and modifying the campaign finance portion. To raise the ballot access threshold to 2% of the presidential and gubernatorial vote, or 130,000 votes, whichever is higher, alongside raising the independent petitioning requirements, and to condition the passage of the package on this, shows that the Commission was always interested in killing third parties. Campaign finance should help third parties become viable. Their candidates should not have to prove viability before receiving funds. The legislature should take this opportunity to link ballot access to 50,000 votes for any statewide office, or 20,000 statewide registrants. This would finally de-link ballot access from the gubernatorial race. And expanding to registrants would include another legitimate way of counting party support in the electorate. The legislature also has a chance to reform the broken campaign finance system handed to it by the Commission. It should act swiftly to bring maximum individual donations to any state candidate down to the federal level of $2,800. The limit for party donations should be reduced from the high cap of $117,000 to a similar level, and party transfers to candidates, especially those that opt into the campaign financing system, should be banned alongside the rollover of campaign war chests for public financing candidates. Of course, the legislature should move to implement a clean money, clean election system of financing instead of a partial public match. But it could also make matching funds more accessible for third-party candidates and challengers. We also call for ranked choice voting, like Maine has instituted, and proportional representation, as most electoral democracies have. Ranked choice voting would provide a majority winner in every election in which it is used, and would eliminate the so-called spoiler effect. It was recently passed in New York City, but only for primaries. We'd like to see it in the general election. Proportional representation would mean every vote for a legislative seat matters, as parties would be awarded seats based on the proportion of the vote they receive. This would expand democratic choice and give voters more potential options on the ballot that best represent their ideas. Because the state could be treated as one large district, it would also solve the problem of gerrymandering that has long plagued New York State politics. Thank you.